Well, I think we can all agree that we need some more psychedelic rock, some really good, like, late 60s, early 70s acid rock, and where better to look than a Canadian band? So let's dive into it. Destroyer by the Black Mountain. So the Black Mountain is a Canadian, like, acid rock, psychedelic rock kind of an outfit. These guys I've really enjoyed. They're very dark in approach. Like, they remind me of what, say, an early Black Sabbath would have been. And a lot of these tracks on here definitely feel that very psychedelic and acid rock style. It's very dark, it's very heavy in tone without being technical or brutal. And I've really been digging this album. This probably up to this point is probably their strongest outfit. Like, all of their albums up to this point, there have been like one or two tracks that I really enjoyed, and then the rest are just kind of okay. But here we find a very solid work pretty much from start to finish. And of course, for me, I love the fact that it has a very distinctive middle point. There are 8 tracks, so 4 tracks on each side, and for that, just my own mental thing really appreciates that, and it's got a perfect runtime as well. It's not too long, it's not too short, it's exactly as long as it needs to be. Certain tracks on here really stand out for me. Honestly, it's probably the smaller moments where they get a little bit more on the electronical side, where it sounds almost like a Tame Impala, or it sounds more of like that synth dream pop that certain bands are using. Like, I'm thinking of another contemporary Canadian act of Alvi's. Very similar to that in terms of like a synth approach. Songs like Closer to the Edge and Pretty Little Lazies and License to Drive. All these guys have this dream aspect about it, where even though we are surrounded by this really heavy and really dense and really dark soundscapes, some of these take a little bit of a lighter approach, and Close to the Edge probably being the lightest of the track and also the shortest of the tracks as well, have that. And I love the rhythm sections on this track. I love how dream-esque it is, how floating it is, and even the vocal styles lend itself to it, and especially where it's aligned within it, because the track that preceded this, Horns Are Rising, is very distorted, very heavy hitting. The distortion that we have on the guitars and the surrounding synths that accompany it are bleeding with this dark grit. And then the next song of High Rise, after Closer to the Edge, it kind of follows that same suit, where it's got that acid wash feel to it, where all the colors are kind of bleeding out and we're left with this very corrosive feel. And I feel like that's a really interesting take of this style of music, of this style of acid rock. And I do want to gush a little bit about Pretty Little Lazies. This might be my second favorite track after Closer to the Edge. It feels like a love child between like an early Floyd album, like Syd Barrett style. Like, it opens up feeling almost like, say, a Doors song. This is the end, where it's got that bass or that guitar style where it's very trippy, very atmospheric, and it feels especially like the end. I was almost expecting the lead singer to come on and be like, "This is the end, my friend, the end." But instead, we are shoved into this almost Blue Oyster Cult feel of the guitars blasting us down. And then kind of like in the midpoint, that's where we come back into that like Pink Floyd, that Syd Barrett-esque styles. And so it almost feels like a three-way between these three older bands of the past, and this is the love child that they've produced, because the mid section on here is like straight out of a Floyd. Like, we're looking at like Emily Plays. But again, we get into that like Blue Oyster Cult jam session right after that, where it's like a no holds bars, the drums and the rhythm are just blowing you down, and the soundscapes that we have kind of flurrying all around us are just like, it's giving your head like a little bit of a shake, with all these really different genres and styles all kind of around the same time period, so it does feel very unified in that. And even with all these different styles that are going on with this like 5-minute trip, it still feels very whole and very cohesive throughout the whole thing. Another song that I really need to call out is The Boogie Lover, and I love just how like menacing this song is. It feels very much of current sounds. Like, this sounds more like, say, like a Black Keys track. It's much more simple in that approach, where it's just got this guitar riff that's really tasty and juicy, being played over top of this track, and I love the vocal works that come on and really play around with this as well. Like, Boogie Lover is a perfect name for this, because even as dark and as menacing as this track is, it does have this playful aspect of this boogie lover coming in. Then we come into the last two tracks, and I love how this album ends with License to Drive. I love, again, we've got those really nice and clean synth where it takes almost a minute and a half to really get going, and then once it does, when we get into that License to Drive, the song is very driven. It's very like oomph, you know, it feels perfect too, like a very late night drive where it's very calm, it's very peaceful, it's very chill. But then you also realize that you're going like 80 miles an hour, so it's got this driven aspect, this very go atmosphere that we have it, and how it's able to blend these two aspects together, very well done and constructed very tastily. And FD72, the closing track on here, brilliant. I love this track. And again, it's all those styles kind of coming together. We have the very distorted guitar coming in, the singing styles, but I love how like menacing and dark and gritty the first little bit is. And when we come into the second minute of this, it kind of like brings about this fresh air by going into a major chord, and it just kind of brings this new life into it. And that's where they're really singing that 1972. It's almost like an homage to the year that they're trying to emulate on this, bringing all of that dark and guttural and dense energy to this point is a very big breath of fresh air. And I'm so glad that they decided to end it on this atmospheric, very uplifting piece and moment. You know, it leaves me with a very good and fresh taste in my mouth that makes me want to go right back to the beginning of The Future Shade, which I actually hadn't talked about, being very menacing, very driven. It starts off with that like rhythm section and then straight into the guitar work. Very well done. So yeah, overall this album is probably the Black Mountain's strongest work. They're most cohesive, most realized, the most enjoyable listen from start to finish. There's no track on here that I want to skip. There's no moment on here that I feel like I want to tap out. Each moment does exactly what it needs to do very nicely. So yeah, I'd have absolutely no problem picking this up in physical format. This wouldn't be an impulse buy for me at all. This would definitely be one that I'd go to a record store to go and pick up, and I might actually just go and do that because I feel like this is the kind of album that I'd want to have on an LP, like in vinyl form, to put on my turntable and really get the flashbacks from the late 60s, early 70s. Not only capturing the spirit of the past, but modernizing it and pushing it further into the future. And so I think that's a really good tagline. If anybody wants to use a quote for me, that'd be the one. So yeah, that's about it for Destroyer by Black Mountain. What did you guys think? Have a listen to it, because it's highly recommended for me. Let me know of your own thoughts by commenting down below. And that's about it. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.